Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, April 9th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about President Biden's election odds and the improvement that we've seen over the past 2 weeks in these election odds, and honestly speaking, across this country in polling data, in fundraising data, wherever you're looking, President Biden has seen a significant uptick in terms of expected support for this coming November election. Now, this is major news because President Biden, for an extended period of time, since September of 2023, has been losing to Donald Trump on the national level. At no point in time between September of 2023 and even today has Joe Biden been able to trounce Donald Trump when it comes down to the general election matchup polling data. And that matters because this is the first time that President Trump has ever led in polls against President Biden, and also has led in any polls since the 2016 Republican National Convention, when he briefly led Hillary Clinton on the national average by a singular percentage point. And for the past 3 months, it has looked increasingly stronger for President Trump. When he initially took the lead back in September of 2023, the lead was never more than a point or a point and a half. But as we got closer into the start of the 2024 election season and in the 2024 just year itself, Donald Trump started expanding his leads. It went from 2 to 3 points, at one point in time 4 to 4.5 points nationwide, and now has been reduced down to just a 0.3% advantage, with a growing trend in favor of President Biden. But it isn't just the generic, ballot or general election polling data here. It is also the betting odds, where people are predicting President Biden and Trump to go. And you can see that for a long time, Republicans were expected to lose this presidential election to President Biden, but he had never been higher than 41.6% when it came down to the betting odds. And so over the past couple of months, we've seen Donald Trump, in fact, take a higher chance at winning the election than Joe Biden. And you saw that at a low point, Joe Biden, similar to what we've seen in the general election data here, had a very low shot at winning when he was down around 4 points nationwide. And the betting odds had actually reflected that. You saw here that President Biden had just 26.6% in terms of a chance here at winning the election based on the betting odds, while Donald Trump was soaring high around 44%. Now today, we have seen a massive uptick in chances for President Biden, the highest point he has been since going all the way back to April and May of 2023. So for President Biden to be at this point is a really good sign here for him, the Democratic Party, and it also shows a decrease in expectation for Donald Trump relative to where he was even just a few weeks ago, at a high point at 47% here today at 43%. And I will say, like I was mentioning, with the general election polling data, the Trump v. Biden head-to-head matchup here, the lead has narrowed. But we've also seen a narrowing in a number of battleground states, like Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin, and pretty much stagnant leads here for President Biden in states like Pennsylvania. Overall, we have seen a reversion in terms of support away from Donald Trump and for President Biden. And now we have to ask, exactly where else are we seeing this happen? So I told you about the betting odds on Real Clear Politics, but I also think a really good website where we can visualize this is Predict-It, where for a long period of time, they've been asking this question: which political party will win the 2024 election? Now, of course, this seems like a coded question, right? Where it's just essentially asking, do you think Donald Trump or Joe Biden will win the election? But that isn't necessarily always the case. For a while, there were simultaneous leads for Donald Trump in the who will win the presidential election versus which party will win the presidential election, where Donald Trump was leading in who will win and Democrats were leading in what party will win. But today, the Democrats actually stand at pretty much their highest point, going all the way back, I think, in the past 3 months, there isn't a point where you've seen Democrats at this high of a percentage at a chance at victory. And I think a large reason for that, too, is because we've now seen a reversion in the who will win the 2024 presidential election. For months on end, it was Donald Trump through February and March, and then Joe Biden and Donald Trump became roughly neck and neck. And with a recent climb in polling and fundraising, President Biden seems to be at the highest point over the past 3 months alone. And that's good news for the Democratic Party, because it continues to reiterate that we have seen a trend line here over the past week and a half, that the Democratic Party is in a better position now than they were months ago, right? Which is a good thing. And it also comes at a time where we're seeing a number of factors come into play that are benefiting the Democratic Party in the upcoming election. For instance, in Nebraska, President Trump and the Republican Party there have been trying to make this state winner take all. That failed. And although they have dedicated themselves to saying that they're going to do this before the end of the session, they might call a special session to make this happen, yada, 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 whatever they're trying to say, chances are this is going to fail because there are enough Democrats and Republicans who are in opposition to this that they can filibuster this until it just simply will not happen. In the state of Arizona, the Supreme Court there just decided today that abortions are set to be illegal in nearly all circumstances, re-implementing a law from 1864, a near total ban on abortion in a state that already had many restrictions on the issue of abortion, and something that will certainly inspire voters to get out to the ballot box in conjunction with an expected abortion right, an Arizona right to abortion initiative that is set to hit the ballot this coming November in the state of Arizona that potentially could come alongside states like Colorado and Maine, and Iowa even, and Montana, which has a very, very important Senate and House race in that state. Nevada might have one. Pennsylvania might have one. These abortion referendums that are set to hit the ballot or may very well hit the ballot or are already going to hit the ballot in states like Florida and New York and Maryland where Democrats need to improve in congressional districts and down ballot races here. We are seeing now a resurgence in support for President Biden, largely not alone on the issue of abortion, but on a reconvening with where the Democratic electorate is on both domestic and international issues. Now, looking at Donald Trump's most recent stance on the issue of abortion, he declined to endorse a national limit, but he's talking about abortion for a reason. Voters do care about this, and when the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that IVF was essentially illegal under the current provisions of the abortion laws in the state, it inspired voters in Alabama, in a district that had voted for Trump very heavily, to vote for the Democrat by 25 percentage points. And so when Republicans saw that, it was very much a warning sign. Democrats capitalized on that. They said that this is the turning of the tides here. The Republican extremism has gone too far on the issue of abortion, and it forced the hand of many national Republicans to make a position on this topic. And Donald Trump himself now saying that abortion is up to the states. But ultimately, what he needed to take was not this stance. It wasn't a pro-life stance either. It was a stance in favor of a woman's right to choose. Because fundamentally, this nation leans to the left heavily on this issue of abortion, right? 60 to 70% of this country self-identifies as pro-choice. That is not a force to be reckoned with. And we saw what happened when they were reckoned with back in 2022. That's why Democrats were able to maintain control of the U.S. Senate. That's why Democrats were almost able to maintain control of the U.S. House of Representatives. That's why they picked up numerous governorships in what was expected to be a red wave year. This issue seemed to be super important to voters across battleground states and is now becoming increasingly more important going into this election, going into the general election season. And Joe Biden, with all of his money and all of his support from pro-choice leaders across this country, is going to try to capitalize on this and make this a mainstream issue again in the 2024 election. Now, looking at this surge in the betting odds, I think it also comes at a time where President Biden now has called for an immediate ceasefire for the war in the Middle East, an immediate ceasefire for Israel and Hamas to hold on, the wartime efforts that are taking place. And I think fundamentally, President Biden has seen a dip in support for a variety of issues, but one that I think has really been a very, very important one to young voters is specific to the war in the Middle East. And I think now that he has called for an immediate ceasefire, you are starting to see a reversion in support back towards President Biden. You are also starting to see, too, not only on that topic, but now that abortion is becoming mainstream, an additional reversion in support. I think there's a combination of factors here that are leading to President Biden's uptick in terms of overall, leads here, winning the lead in Pennsylvania, expanding to Wisconsin, now potentially going to get back to leading in the state of Wisconsin, in Michigan seeing a tightening up of the race there, and Georgia also seeing a tightening up of the race. Nothing dramatic, not a major 10-point shift across this country, but the betting odds very much speak for themselves. The betting odds here do indicate that they expect Joe Biden to win, and that uniquely has its own merits. Because the type of person spending their money on a presidential race is more than likely going to pull out their own internal biases and bet on an election with their own money on what they think is going to actually happen, not on what they want to happen. And I think that's really where you see the betting odds here start to come into this as a very, very interesting point of view. I think in 2022, they were wrong. They expected Republicans to do tremendously better than they actually did. But Democrats pointed at that and said, if they were wrong tremendously in 2022, what's to say they aren't wrong again in 2024? Well, now that President Biden is leading in the betting odds here, I think they're going to really die that down a little bit less, or maybe they'll say they're underestimating President Biden, but they wouldn't necessarily be alone in that distinction. Even the major pollsters here seem to suggest that President Biden is probably better off than what the horse race polls actually suggest. I don't think anybody genuinely believes that Donald Trump is going to win the national popular vote by 3 to 4 points. I don't think that's even going to come to a question when we get to November. Could he win the national popular vote? Maybe. I think there's a possibility, depending on reversions in support towards Trump and the GOP in states like California and New York and major populist ones that have strong Democratic support, that will vote blue no matter what, but may be inclined to vote for Donald Trump in some of the more competitive districts. You might have seen a decrease in support amongst minority communities where President Biden will be visiting them in this election. A bunch of different factors could be at play that could lead to Donald Trump winning the national popular vote, but as of where we are today, I do not think that he would. Nor do I think that President Biden is doomed to lose this election by what the polls actually suggest. A map like this one I've been showing you for weeks because I think this is probably one of the likeliest outcomes of this upcoming election. Should the election be held today, a map like this one is not too far out from reality. And I think seeing that now, and the Trump campaign recognizing it, and Republicans and Democrats equally recognizing it as well, it also increases the chances that President Biden does actually win the national election here. Because it shows that even with gains in major states like Georgia and Arizona and maintaining the swing states of Texas, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida, and a gain in a state like Nevada, which hasn't voted for a Republican on the presidential level since 2004. 20 years prior to this election, Nevada last went red. That's hard. That's really hard to flip. And even if it does, Democrats still win the election with all the Clinton states from 2016, with the exception of Nevada, and Biden winning the states that he won by 5 points or more, like Minnesota, like New Hampshire, like Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, and Nebraska's 2nd District. And the blue wall here stays intact. President Biden wins with 270 electoral votes. No matter how you cut it here, President Trump needs to run up the map the way he did in 2016 in order to win this election. There is no room for error here, because even if you take away a state like Michigan, President Biden could counteract it with a state like Georgia. If you take away a state like Wisconsin, President Biden could counteract it with a state like Arizona. And that's not even to mention potentially holding on to a state like Nevada, which would expand the electoral map larger than if the blue wall had just maintained itself. And so you start to see that the pathways to victory here actually seem to be higher in chance for President Biden than they are for President Trump. He has to work significantly harder and is already coming into it at a deficit here. President Biden is significantly out fundraising, which I can imagine is leading people to realize that come Labor Day, President Trump is going to be tapped out in terms of resources. He's not going to have the funds and the necessary, capability to win this election. And that's what matters here. Money talks. These polling numbers do as well, and all of it seems to be coming better for President Biden over the past couple of weeks and in a continuous upward trajectory. Now, of course, things can change between now and November quite significantly in an even shorter period of time. The reason I'm covering this is because it's a bit different from the narrative that we've seen over the past 3 to 4 months here that President Trump does have the fundamental upper hand. Do I think President Trump would win the election if held today? I don't know. The answer yesterday was yes. And I do think that his performances in some of these battleground states is certainly impressive. I am, impressed, in awe even, of Donald Trump's leads in states like North Carolina. His leads even in states like Nevada, for instance, where he was losing in 2020. He lost in 2016. Mitt Romney lost in 2012. McCain lost in 2008. I mean, Nevada itself has never been a strong Republican state. And for Donald Trump to be ahead by 3 points certainly does mean something. However, I do believe that these numbers are underestimating President Biden. And I think what we have seen today, Donald Trump probably would still win the election. But I'm a lot more apprehensive to say so than I even was yesterday or even was 2 to 3 weeks ago. President Trump certainly has things that he can make improvements on, but President Biden has a lot more upward mobility. And we are only starting to see that get tapped into over the past week alone. This increase in leads in polls like I&I, or even a narrowing in some polls like Morning Consult and Data for Progress and NPR, even in Fox News here, which has Donald Trump ahead by 5 points, and Rasmussen Reports has Donald Trump ahead by 8 points, there's a lot more blue on this polling average than there was in many, many weeks past. For periods of time, it was endless leads for Donald Trump with very, far out and interspersed Biden advantages from NPR News and Marist College or Quinnipiac University or The Economist in YouGov. But for the most part, Donald Trump had maintained a lead that now today he no longer leads in the majority of polls. He has the average here because he's up by 8 points in Rasmussen Reports, up by 5 points in Fox News, but all of the recent ones beyond those show a race that has Trump up ahead by 1, or in the worst case, down by 3. And that might be consistent going into November, which of course would be better news for the Biden campaign than losing. And looking at these betting markets, it looks like things might turn that way significantly in favor of the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.